Dream lovers, literally. Machine, computer, body takeover, possibly. And also, for sure, a killer alligator. DC Universe's Doom Patrol, Episode 11, Review and Breakdown. Hey Twisted people, it's your Twisted Girl next door here, and today I am doing a review, breakdown, and of course my comic book talk of DC Universe's Doom Patrol, Episode 11, Francis Patrol. So, if you're new here, this is the way it goes. I do my overall thoughts of the episode, as in my overall thoughts of the episode, the happenings in the episode, and what I thought about that. Ship talk, because I do love talking about relationships. Predictions, because I constantly get them wrong when it comes to this particular show. Oh my gosh. And finally, because these characters are based off of comic book characters and comic book series, I like to do comic book talk. Overall, this episode wasn't as intense as the previous 2 to 3 episodes. It felt a little bit more intimate and not necessarily, I don't want to call it a mid-tier episode. I guess maybe I've been spoiled thus far, as the previous 2 to 3 episodes have been so intense, so high-strung when it comes to the energy, when it comes to the weirdness, that this one felt a little bit more tamed, a little bit more, I guess intimate would be the best word for it, because it dealt with more of the interpersonal dynamics of the characters, their kind of personal character arcs and their personal growths. For some of the characters, it was slight personal growths that we got to see, and for others, they were going through major personal growth or major shifts when it came to who they are and their own, lives and past. So I appreciated that. It was somewhat necessary, but at the same time, when we've been so, I guess you could say, spoiled from the last 2 to 3 episodes, it also felt like, oh, okay, so this is a little bit more of a slower pace. Okay, I'm fine with that. It's fine. Okay. Definitely not as gross, though, as the previous couple of episodes, which I was actually quite appreciative of. Larry's dream lover. Literally. So in this plot line, we got a glimpse of what happened to Larry while Jane and Cliff were in the underground. And I thought that was pretty interesting that they did it that way, because, we got to see what Rita and Vic were up to. So now we got to see, for a glimpse, starting off with this episode, where Larry was when negative energy was outside of him. And where he was getting hot and sweaty with his dream lover, John, or his lost love, John. And it was in a motel. And I guess that's somewhere that Larry always wanted to go with John. So he's kind of low maintenance in that regard. Not the most, high maintenance fantasy you can have. So then we're brought back to when Cliff and Jane come out and the negative energy goes back into Larry. So that wakes Larry up from the dreamscape that he was in with John. And right before he does that, Larry tells John, I guess for the first time maybe, that he loves him. Larry pleads with negative energy to take him back to that dream sequence, because he feels like he was finally making progress. Him and negative energy are sort of getting along. And so negative energy does take him back into the dreamscape, but it's not into the whole motel. It's actually into a gay bar, a dream gay bar that John is at with some friends. So it's kind of like this public place, and Larry finds John, and John seems very happy to have him there. They're, happy, he has his friends, he's public, but Larry still has a problem with this. John tries to get Larry to just kind of relax, but they get into an argument because John is telling Larry that he's still very much worrying about what other people think of him, even in a dreamscape. And so they argue, and then Larry realizes that something is off based off of what John says, when John says, I'm not going to spend my last days doing this with you. So that lets Larry know that maybe this isn't necessarily totally a dream. When Larry comes out of his dreamscape, he finds that negative energy has left him a clue of Post-its that spells out Erie. And that is where he finds elderly John. And our suspicions are pretty much confirmed that wasn't totally a dream, or more so it was a dream, but John was very much real, that was John's subconscious or consciousness, that negative energy had connected him and Larry in that dreamscape. Larry and John talk. John, as an elderly man, kind of on death's knocking on death's door, explains to Larry that he moved on. It took him some time, but that he lived his life. He found other loves and things of that nature. Larry tells him he didn't necessarily move on, that he's kind of been stuck there. John is very much, as he should be, probably surprised, although he doesn't ask him at all about like what happened to him. He doesn't ask any of that, but he does, implore that, yeah, you don't seem to have had any kind of intimate relationship since JFK's assassination. Like, whoa. And they have a very sweet moment and they watch the sunset, or more so, Larry watches the sunset. Larry also tells John about somewhat of the negative energy inside of him and that growing relationship, platonic or whatever. And John seemingly passes out. I also was kind of confused. Wondered maybe he had died at that moment. Maybe that would have been too on the nose, but he is not conscious any longer. So Larry leaves, but he seems to have made some sort of peace with himself. And I think it was sort of like peace with the whole John situation as well. And him and negative energy seem to be on good terms. This was another progressive episode for Larry, and I think we've been getting that inching along with Larry's character since probably like the second episode, and I'm glad it did this 180 because, like I said, when we first started going on this journey with Larry, that it didn't seem like he was making any progress, and I had hoped that he wouldn't just be, wallowing in his self-pity for most of the season. So I'm glad that he made some real big strides. It also answered the question for me if John was still alive. I think I asked that a couple episodes ago. I was like, it doesn't seem like John is dead. So where is John? And did Larry ever try to contact him in this time? And we also find out that Larry's kids, his sons, are probably still alive too. So Larry has pretty much cut himself off from everyone. His wife died of cancer back in the 80s, but his kids are still alive. And John was right there all that time. And so Larry just pretty much decided he wasn't going to talk to anyone. It's not like all his, family or something died or anything, and he just kind of, really isolated himself. So it lets you see just how deep that self-loathing went for him. It was also cool to see just how powerful negative energy actually is. We're learning all types of different things that negative energy gets to do. So that's interesting. It's also kind of creates a dynamic where right now it seems like negative energy is the one that's super powerful. And I wonder if we're ever going to get to the point where we figure out a way that, or if it's shown in a way that Larry is also somewhat more than just the vessel for a powerful being, but he too, like enmeshing with negative energy, can be powerful as well, even conscious. But I guess we'll have to see, because right now Larry's going on more of a personal journey. Cliff and Rita go to Bump's funeral. So Cliff finds out that Bump died, Bump being his old assistant when he was a race car driver, who also, to Cliff's knowledge, had something of an affair with his wife and raised his daughter Clara once he was assumed dead, Cliff, and once his wife died. So now Bump has died, seemingly eaten by Francis, the giant alligator that Bump went after. And so what ends up happening is that Rita and Cliff end up at the memorial, which is happening at a bar that Clara also works at. So all throughout this, Rita's kind of getting in with the locals. She's saying her real name, which is very cool progress. And Cliff, though, is very nervous to reveal himself to Clara. And so what ends up happening is that Clara gives a speech about Bump and how she gave him a watch, her only belongings after the accident, which incidentally is actually Cliff's watch, but she has it engraved for Bump of my father, my hero. And so what is assumed is that the alligator also ate the watch. And so Cliff decides to somehow prove himself to Clara that he will go get the watch by killing Francis. Rita, of course, thinks this is a stupid idea, but she goes into the swamp with Cliff. Cliff has a major breakdown. He kind of stops for a minute. He's about to go back, but then Francis, the alligator, jumps from the water, and what we find out is that Cliff ended up getting back the watch. But he doesn't give it to Clara face to face, which we kind of all saw coming. And he puts it on a table before she comes back out. She looks at it, she's looking around, and it kind of ends there, that Cliff didn't get to have that reunion with his daughter. I didn't really think that this was character growth for Cliff. I think it was maybe a lot more angst for him because he doesn't get to, confront or have a reunion with Clara. So it's kind of like, okay, he did all of that for what exactly? And it definitely wasn't closure, because that can't be his closure, that he gives her back the watch and he just kind of slinks off out of her life, right? So it was very different from Larry's plot line, where Larry actually got some real closure. And with this, I felt like they kind of left it open. It was nice to see Rita saying her real name. So she's been having her slow, bit by bit personal growth as well. It was very cool how she's always able to eat as much as she does. She didn't have like a mini breakdown where her, skin falls off or anything like that, which was really, once again shows that Rita, what we're seeing with Rita is through other people's plot lines, when she reacts and how she, handles those, we're seeing her growth as well, even though we haven't gotten a plot with her that is central Rita, which I'm waiting for. I would love that we go circle back around to her past, but I guess we have to get kind of Larry and Cliff out of the way first in terms of their growth and their closures. It was also a very cool mention of Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man on the news right before we heard that Bump got killed and that he's on trial and he won't testify against his other half, the dinosaur head on his shoulders. Jane and Vic go looking for the hero on the beach. So in this plot part of the episode, Jane has a renewed energy to find the chief, mainly because she wants answers of where he was going to leave her and what exactly is his motives when it comes to her. So she has a renewed sensibility to want to get Chief. She calls a team meeting that no one really shows up to. Her alternate personality, one of the alternate personalities, takes Cliff and Rita off to where Bump's memorial is, so that puts them out of commission. And so that leaves her with going to Vic for help when it comes to Flex Mentello, which was the clue that they got in the previous episodes. Now, right before we see Jane go to Vic for help, Vic is going through his own situation as he has taken Grid, his software, outside of his body and put him in like a word processor, because that is not a modern computer that he was on. And he's talking to Grid, and Grid honestly sounds really like off his rocker at this point. And he's telling Vic that, yes, you're getting more and more powerful. Don't you love it? You were 40% cyborg at one time, and now you're 60% cyborg. So basically, he drops this revelation on Vic that he's growing more and more to be more machine than human. And then we get that scene of Vic pretty much digging into his arm that he cut open to see just how much of his body is still human and how much of it is machine. And that was gross, but we've seen grosser. So I'm going to say that was pretty mild. He's freaked out because as he's pushing his bones and muscles to the side, he's seeing that what he thought was pretty much all human is now very much turning into machine. So it's freaking him out. But at that moment, Jane knocks on his door. Jane tells Vic that she pretty much got a lead when it comes to Flex Mentello's wife, and so they decide to go meet with her. While in the black school bus, Vic and Jane have kind of, I don't want to call it a heart-to-heart, but because Jane is being a little bit more personable after coming from under the underground, she does kind of have a conversation with Vic about what's going on with him, and he confides in her. Not as much as he confided with Rita, but that's because, they might be romantic soon. But they do have a heart-to-heart, him and Jane, and so Vic explains that he doesn't want the rest of everyone else to know about it. He doesn't want to tell his dad what's going on about him kind of losing control and maybe Jane's painting coming to life. Although Jane tries to tell him, I drew that painting after I came out of a donkey. So that could be anything. So they have that talk, and then they get ambushed by some people that have some weird thing on their elbow. Such a random place to have something. Look at my elbow. Oh my gosh, that line. And so Jane ends up fighting one of the guys off, but Vic gets taken. And it would seem that Vic has gotten taken by Agent Darren Jones of the Bureau of Normalcy. Somehow, I was really confused at that. I mean, what I gathered from this particular plot line was that this is a setup for the bigger stuff. This plot line is actually connected to the bigger arcs, and that's probably why it happened. A lot of that stuff happened kind of towards the end because it was setting up going into the next episode. With Larry and Cliff, it was a little bit more interpersonal. With this one, it's leading into a bigger plot line of the bigger arc of what's going on with Vic and who the heck is Flex, right? Which I'll talk about a little bit more because Flex is actually in the comic book, so I do want to touch on that just a little bit. And so, yeah, it needed to happen. I'm really freaked out about what's happening to Vic. It's actually very creepy, and Grid sounds, can you imagine like your software talking to you? I mean, can you imagine being Cyborg? But let's say you were Cyborg and then your software is talking to you and it sounds like it's gone insane. And this is something that's in your body supposed to be helping you out. And it sounds like he's gone off his rocker somehow. And that your body somehow is materializing like machinery inside of you. And then I was also confused about Jones because last time I checked, he got beat up by Danny the Street. So did they just let him go? Did they just let him go and then he just went back to business as usual? But then that doesn't make sense, right? Because the whole thing about Beard Hunter is that the Bureau of Normalcy sent him over to the mansion because they lost Jones, right? So I'm a little confused. I think something might be amiss with that because how does the Bureau of Normalcy think he's missing yet somehow he has some sort of facility? John and Larry. So that's done, right? I mean, yeah, that's done. John is an old guy. He's, halfway in the grave at this point. And, he's moved on in a way. I mean, yes, he was, playing with the dreams and stuff because, as he said, everyone dies and, I still, have feelings and things of that nature. But it was more so with the dreamscape. So it's not like Larry can build a life with this man, right? Up to that point, John was kind of this fantasy, this thing he couldn't get a hold of. But by having to actually go see the physical John, the John outside of his imagination, he had to face that the world had moved on and he needed to as well. That John wasn't just this fantasy that he could just, dive into to never look outside of himself. So I thought it was necessary, but I definitely think the ship is over with. Who is Flex Mentallo? Yeah, it's pretty weird actually, and sort of meta who he is. So he's definitely in the comic books. I don't want to dive too hardcore into his plot lines and summaries of, certain plot lines and things he's gone through because I kind of want to see what the live action does with him versus the way he is handled in the comic books. But since they've mentioned him, I thought we could talk a little bit about the surface stuff, but I don't want to dive too much into the major plot lines and revelations with this character because I want to see how they remix it on the live action. And I feel like it could be looked on as kind of spoilery to get too much into Flex Mentallo at this point. So his origin is pretty weird in the sense that, okay, so he was created in the 90s. He came about in the 90s. He was introduced in Doom Patrol. And Doom Patrol first meet him how would you say that, Danny the Street, right? They meet him there. He doesn't have any memories. And through something that happens, he basically gets his memories back and remembers who he is. He's Flex Mentallo, the muscle man who can basically flex his muscles to change reality. The interesting thing about his character, and it can be kind of confusing when you're reading his origin, is that he kind of exists in his own world, like his own universe, but then it's also sort of meta because he is, and I think I can say this because of the fact that Doom Patrol, he literally walks off of a comic book, right? His body is missing from a comic book. He's also a comic book. He's also a comic book character. So it's like he exists in the real world, but then there's also this self-awareness or this awareness in the Doom Patrol universe that he's also not actually in their world because he's a created character from a comic book. So it's an interesting plot line and especially his connections to certain things. And so he's definitely in the comics. It sounds really interesting. I'm really excited to see how they're going to make him in live action because he's like a muscle man who can basically flex, and him flexing is how he executes his powers. So that's going to be hilarious depending on how they do it. if Danny the Street doesn't come back around, then they can't meet him there. So it's kind of like, where do they meet Flex? So now we're at this part of the video where I try to once again make a prediction. And I actually do have predictions this time, and I think it's because this was a little bit more of a mellower episode, so I could like grasp it a little bit. So one of the guesses I have is that we are definitely going to see Flex. I know it's still basic B prediction, but I do think that he's going to have a big connection when it comes to Jones and who Flex actually is and his connections. I also think that because of this thing with Larry and John, that this has opened up a way for Larry to possibly get another love interest. I don't think it's going to happen this season because they kind of move a little bit like molasses when it comes to the personal dynamics, but I definitely think it's a setup for him to kind of have his happiness in terms of moving on. Oh, and I've got a third one. We are going to see Clara again. I do not think this is the last that we have seen of Cliff's daughter. Okay, so what did you think of the latest episode of DC Universe's Doom Patrol? Episode 11, Francis Patrol. Did you dig it? Did you like the fact that this was a little bit more interpersonal dynamics? Did you think we needed the breather? Do you think that the thing of Vic digging into his arm was gross? Probably not as gross as the Beard Hunter, but definitely made me a little uncomfortable. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your theories. Let me know your better predictions than mine in the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts. And also, be sure to subscribe so that you're the first to know when I post my videos of all things horror, dark fantasy, and dark superhero. Thanks for watching. Let's get creepy together.